Hi, everybody. This is Zen Honeycutt of Moms Across America, and I'm here again with Dr. Mark Pettus. Hi, Dr. Pettus.
Hi, Zen. How are you?
Great, very good. I want to introduce Dr. Mark Pettus. He's the medical director of functional formularies and the director of population health at Berkshire Health Systems, which is a hospital in Vermont, correct?
Yeah, we are in Western Massachusetts.
Oh, Western Massachusetts. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
just south of the Vermont border. Yeah, we're close to Vermont.
Awesome. Okay, and we're going to talk today about micronutrient deficiency, which is very important because without these vital micronutrients, we can't fight things like illness and cancer and grow and develop and function formally and function properly. And Mark will get into all of this, I'm sure, and we're going to be talking about your recent webinar that you put on functionalformularies.com. You can go there under continuing education and see it. It's about the fifth one down on the list. It is very important, and you also get credit for continuing education, right, for your healthcare degree. So if you're a nutritionist or dietitian or healthcare person at all, you can get credit for that. So I love the webinar, extremely important. It just seems like everybody I know, including myself, is deficient in vitamin D, B12, iron, B6, and interestingly enough, these are the ones that you mentioned that are at the top of the list. Can you please first tell us what is going on? Why are so many people nutrient deficient?
And it certainly challenges the wide-held perception, Zen, that people who eat a reasonably balanced diet are 100% likely to get all of the micronutrients they need. We know that that is not the case. So if you look at many changes over the last generation, most of the food in our food supply, as you and I know many of your listeners know, is processed foods. So the very ways in which we process foods will tend to strip them of most of those critical micronutrients and replace them with essentially nutrient deficient calories. So these empty calories are now responsible for as many as 50 to 55% of the daily caloric expenditure that we consume. This is data from the Center for Disease Control. So number one, we're just not getting nutrient-dense foods in our diets. A second big issue is that our agricultural and mono-commodity agricultural techniques, big agra, grows foods in a way that is not respectful of the nutrient content of the soil. So we've lost the restorative agricultural techniques. And when you look at, over the last 50 years, the amount of some of these essential micronutrients, things like magnesium, things like zinc, things like vitamin C, things like iron, the foods today have much less in them because the soil they are grown in have much less in them. And then I would say, lastly, the third thing, Zen, is that so many people are on so many medications these days that it's very easy to lose touch with the fact that many of these medications interfere with our capacity to absorb many of these critical nutrients, and that just becomes the perfect storm. So those are the main reasons why so many Americans now are deficient.
So processed foods, you said they can strip the food. So does it like get heated out? Or just is so the process of making the processed foods actually diminishes the micronutrients in there? So somehow they get heated out, is that it? Or processed out? What happens?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at the solvents that are used to prepare many processed foods, if you look at the temperatures that they are prepared at, if you look at many of the preservatives and things that are added to foods, all of that will in some way affect the micronutrient concentration.
Right.
And then I would just say, the food industry is just not interested in providing nutrients to people. They're interested in providing foods that are tasty and are more, to draw them to us. So there hasn't been a great deal of philosophic advocacy on behalf of assuring that people are getting the nutrients they need in the foods that are produced.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that sitting on a shelf life, having a shelf life of 3 years or 5 years for food makes for very nutrient dense food either. They have, like you're saying, the preservatives, they have to create food that can sit on the shelf for a long time or in a can, an aluminum can. So I can imagine that wouldn't help. So You've got
Absolutely.
processed foods, you've got chemicals. And can you talk a little bit about how these chemicals can actually deplete the minerals? For instance, glyphosate. Just reiterate that again about how glyphosate can take the minerals out of the food.
Yeah, well, I think glyphosate is the classic example, Zen. Glyphosate has many properties. One of its original interest was being used to clean pipes because glyphosate is such a powerful chelator. It binds minerals like iron, like magnesium, like zinc, and it will take them out of bioavailable sources. So any genetically modified food that is sprayed with glyphosate will have soil that is very deficient in many of those essential micronutrients. And then, of course, the foods that grow in those soils are quite deficient as well.
Right. And for our audience, it is primarily GMO foods, but also non-organic foods are sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent, such as garbanzo beans, oats, barley, wheat, legumes, sugar. A lot of crops now are sprayed with glyphosate as a drying agent so that they can harvest it more quickly. And the glyphosate will not wash off. It will remain on the foods, and you can see the residue levels by the EPA on the EPA website or on our website, momsacrossamerica.org, if you want to. So it is very important to eat organic, and the process of not eating organic, from what you're saying and from science that shows out there, can contribute to mineral deficiency, correct?
Absolutely. And beyond micronutrient deficiencies, as you and your listeners well know, Zen, the pesticide residues and the many other biologic effects that these residues have on our fertility, on our cognition, and our potential to get cancer, on our gut, are all quite problematic, independent of the micronutrient effects they have in the foods that we eat.
Right. So go organic, everybody. Eat less processed foods, eat more whole foods. And then when you're doing that, you may not have to take as many medications, right? And if you're reducing the amount of medications, then you're also going to reduce the amount of interference these medications will have with your body's ability to process these micronutrients. And just to be clear, micronutrients includes minerals and vitamins. Is that the correct understanding?
That's correct. There are approximately 40 micronutrients. Most are vitamins and minerals. One might include to that both the omega-3 and the omega-6 essential fats, which are essential in that we don't make them. We have to get them for foods. And then there are some amino acids and protein that we have to get from foods as well. And one of the things I didn't mention, Zen, just very quickly, is that there's a lot of public health research. If you ask people in the United States how often they consume 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, nationwide, that number is probably much less than 10%, even less than 5%. And in areas where you've got large insurance companies that can follow people over long periods of time, that number might be a little bit higher, 10, 13%. But the bottom line is that 85 to 90% of all Americans are falling way short in their consumption of 5 servings a day of fruits and vegetables, regardless of how that produce is grown.
So, okay, so that number that you had in your webinar, it was the average American eats only 14% of the RDI, or is it only 14% of Americans eat the RDI, or is that the same thing?
Only 14% of Americans are consuming 5 servings of produce a day. That's what that data was.
Yeah, so 86% of Americans are not listening to mom when she said, eat your veggies. So come on, people, we need to definitely eat our veggies and protect ourselves, because when we don't, we're going to have increased health issues. We're going to have increased health costs. I mean, I just talked to a mom from New York the other day whose 21-year-old, previously very healthy daughter has been having all kinds of stomach issues and has recently, over the past 2 years, had to get 2 stomach surgeries costing $60,000 each. And their retirement is wiped out, right? And they thought they were eating healthy, but unfortunately, folks, she was eating vegan and vegetarian. She was eating garbanzo beans every day and red lentils every night and hummus and pita bread in between. And we are now discovering from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency tests that those food items are very high in glyphosate. And some of them, like red lentils and garbanzo beans, are very high in glyphosate, whether they're organic or not. So there's some fraudulent organic labeling going on, or some contamination. And so people can eat these, they're trying to eat healthy, but they have very high levels of glyphosate. So in addition, though, if you are eating a lot of processed foods, we need to transfer to eat those organic whole fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to show the micronutrients that you were talking about just a minute, so people can have an idea of what you're talking about. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So these are the essential micronutrients that you cover in your webinar, and one of them, or three of them that you mentioned that we have very high deficiency in, is fiber, choline, and potassium. And not a lot of us are very aware of what the impact of those three things are. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of having a deficiency? What would happen to the body if we have deficiencies in fiber, choline, and potassium?
And I think it's one of these silent epidemics in America, Zen. So I appreciate your bringing that up, because fiber, choline, and potassium don't have RDAs. They don't have recommended daily allowances. They haven't been on the radar. We have general recommendations, but they're not very specific. In the example of fiber, I would say what we are learning about the human microbiome and the incredible and profound role that it plays in influencing human health, fermentable fiber from plant-based foods is the single greatest way in which we can diversify and balance that ecosystem. So fiber deficient states, if you will, are probably driving significant shifts in the diversity of our human microbiome. And we know that people confronting chronic complex disease have very limited diversity to that ecosystem. So I think that is one of the single greatest deficient states that your listeners need to be aware of. And it'll influence inflammation, it'll influence your mood, it'll influence your metabolism, etc.
And what that means is eating more broccoli, lettuce. Tell us more. What type of foods does that mean to get more fiber into our diet?
Yeah, so most plant-based foods are going to have significant fermentable fiber that the bacteria in our gut can benefit from. If you look at certain families, like the cruciferous family, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, collards, very high in fermentable fiber. If you look at the allium family, onions, leeks, garlic, very high in fermentable fiber. Nuts, a very good source of fermentable fiber. Jerusalem artichokes, chicory, very good sources of fermentable fiber. We call them prebiotics, and they're essential to human health. And most Americans aren't even on the radar of getting sufficient amounts of those prebiotic fiber-based foods.
And this is important because when you say fermentable fiber, that puts the idea in our head that these vegetables are going to go into our gut, they're going to ferment in our gut, and they're going to provide food for the good bacteria, not necessarily the bad bacteria, correct? So then you're growing the good bacteria in your gut.
So that's exactly right, Zen. And we also know that the byproducts of fermentation, what we call fatty acids, butyric acid, as an example, has powerful health promoting properties. So not only are you promoting growth of healthier strains of bacteria and greater diversity, but the metabolic byproducts of those bacteria are powerful biologic signaling molecules. And we're continuing to learn more about the benefits of this every day.
Great. Awesome. Okay. And what about the deficiency of choline? How would that show up in our body? How does that matter to us?
Yep. Choline is essential in brain and neurologic development. And so whether it's a young mom who is planning a family or who may be pregnant, choline intake, which comes predominantly from egg yolks, animal sources do tend to be a bit higher in choline, fish, meats, eggs, particularly the egg yolks. There are other sources of choline, but those are the highest sources, are essential for growth and development of the brain. The other thing that we see with choline is what we call a methylating agent. Choline methylates, it alters proteins and it alters our DNA to allow them to function in a more beneficial way. So choline affects our book of life. And it'll turn some genes on and turn some genes off. And those patterns appear to be very favorable in the presence of adequate amounts of choline. And then lastly, when you look at the number of people who, as they get older, that confront what we call degenerative neurologic problems, whether it's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or ALS, or in the younger age groups, ADD and ADDHD, choline deficiency is probably a significant contributor to the development of those health issues for people.
Wow, so that is a very important one to look into, with 1 out of 5 people in America with some form of mental illness, which can combine just, mental disorders, and, ADHD and different things like that. So very important to look into choline. Now, that would just mean eating more of these choline-rich foods.
Yes.
Would you also suggest supplementing, considering that 93% of Americans are deficient in choline?
I do think there's a place for supplementation, without a doubt, Zen. And our strategy is generally work with food, but we know that in many instances that will not be sufficient. So there are different forms of choline. Some of the most common that I use in supplementation are called phosphatidylcholine, which is choline that adds a phosphatidyle group, which allows it to get into the brain and into the cells in a much more efficient way.
Okay. And it's a whole nother topic, is supplements, obviously, and we're not advising that anybody take supplements. I was just asking if that's even a possibility. Some things they don't have supplements for. You have to get them out of food sources. So, yes. And then the last one is potassium. How might what might their symptoms be, or how might that impact a person if they're deficient in potassium?
I think in general, the biggest issue with potassium, Zen, relates to blood pressure. And we have long thought blood pressure is predominantly a problem of sodium excess, salt excess. And indeed, most Americans who eat processed foods get much more salt than they actually need. Hypertension is really a potassium insufficient state for many people. And when you look at diets like the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, which has been widely studied around the world and can lower blood pressure. These are plant-based, a Mediterranean type style of eating that has much higher potassium levels in those foods, which are mostly plant-based sources, nuts. So that's really the issue. It's a cardiovascular health issue. Occasionally you'll see people with really low potassium. Usually they're not eating well and they're on a diuretic, a fluid pill for their blood pressure, which further depletes potassium. In those more severe instances, you can get nasty muscle cramping as one of the more predominant symptoms, particularly at night, and that can be a sign of potassium deficiency as well.
Wow, well, very important. I'm sure there's all kinds of issues that we could talk about, but if you want to know more, you can go to functionalformularies.com and go to continuing education and see Dr. Mark Pettus. Has at least 3 or 4 webinars on there now. Dr. John Bagnulo had videos previously on there that were also excellent. Please check those out and listen to your mom, eat your veggies, whole foods, and organic, to reduce the chemicals, and try to stay off medication as much as possible unless you absolutely need it. And thank you very much, Dr. Pettus.
My pleasure, Zen. Always listen to your mom. I love that.
Yes, eat your veggies.
Yeah.
Okay, functionalformularies.com for more information. Thank you again very much to the whole team at Functional Formularies.
Pleasure, Zen. Peace.
Okay.